after more than 2 decades of waivers, we are no closer to a lasting peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. It would be folly to assume that repeating the exact same formula would now produce a different or better result. Therefore, I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. This is a long overdue step to advance the peace process and to work towards a lasting agreement. The United States remains deeply committed to helping facilitate a peace agreement that is acceptable to both sides. I intend to do everything in my power to help forge such an agreement. Without question, Jerusalem is one of the most sensitive issues in those talks. The United States would support a 2-state solution if agreed to by both sides. And finally, I ask the leaders of the region, political and religious, Israeli and Palestinian, Jewish and Christian and Muslim, to join us in the noble quest for lasting peace.
The President's decision is an important step towards peace, for there is no peace that doesn't include Jerusalem as the capital of the State of Israel. I share President Trump's commitment to advancing peace between Israel and all of our neighbors, including the Palestinians. This has been our goal from Israel's first day, and we will continue to work with the President and his team to make that dream of peace come true. President Trump, thank you for today's historic decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. The Jewish people and the Jewish state will be forever grateful.
Palestinians have protested in fury after Donald Trump shattered decades of unwavering U.S. neutrality on Jerusalem. In Ramallah, they took to the streets of the West Bank city, denouncing the United States as being biased in favor of what they called the oppressor.
Right now, what are we asking for? We're asking the Palestinian Authority and the President Mahmoud Abbas to stop all the peace negotiations with the Israelis.
As more Palestinians demonstrated in Gaza, both secular and Islamist factions have called for a general strike and rallies to protest at the Trump decision. But among Israeli residents in the contested city of Jerusalem, Trump's move has been welcomed as a clear message that the United States stands with Israel and the Jewish people.
Jerusalem was always the capital of Israel, and Israel didn't need foreign recognition for it to be the capital. However, I think it's awesome that a country as powerful as the United States and as close to Israel as the United States is taking that step and recognizing the capital.
But a largely negative reaction across the region has been swift, with Palestinians living in refugee camps in Lebanon equally driven to anger. In the light of the unrest, the US State Department has recommended deferring all non-essential travel to the region. While in Turkey, hundreds of demonstrators gathered outside the US Embassy in Ankara and the consulate in Istanbul, condemning the US administration.
You know, the official word from the Pentagon about all this is that our U.S. military is able to handle any situation, any threat that comes its way, in particular to U.S. embassies in the Middle East. But I wanted to find out a little bit more information, so I talked to several of my sources over in U.S. Central Command. They're the ones who are in charge of troops in the Middle East and also in Central Asia. And there is a contingency plan that's in place. You know, we all remember what happened in particular in 2012 with Benghazi and what happened there of troops not being able to get to the site quick enough. Well, there is a U.S. Marine team that's in place. They're called FAST teams, and that's an acronym for Fleet Anti-Terrorism Security Teams. These Fleet Anti-Terrorism Security Teams are going to be there. There are additional troops that are there at the U.S. embassies, in particular in the Middle East, and they're able to provide support if, in fact, they are needed. And also we have the U.S. Army also has a number of readiness, rapid response infantry companies that are going to be able to be there at a moment's notice as well. Now, I did ask, what about if evacuations would need to take place? And they said that the U.S. troops would actually be working with the State Department detail, the security detail, on exactly those plans if they in fact have to happen at some of the U.S. embassies where they have to start evacuating people.
The Palestinian Authority faces a massive cut in U.S. aid now that the House has passed the Taylor Force Act, targeting payments and benefits given to terrorists.
It's called Pay to Slay, rewarding Palestinian terrorists who kill Israelis and others, including Americans, even as U.S. tax dollars flow to the Palestinian Authority. The Taylor Force Act would pressure Palestinian leaders to stop it. The measure passed the House by unanimous consent Tuesday.
With this legislation, we are forcing the PA to choose between U.S. assistance and these morally reprehensible policies.
The Taylor Force Act gets its name from the American combat veteran murdered while on a school trip to Israel in 2016. The 21-year-old terrorist behind the brutal stabbing of Force was killed by police, but he was praised by the Palestinian Authority government and his family given lifelong financial compensation. The compensation given to terrorists includes pension for life, triple the average salary in Palestinian areas, free tuition, health insurance, and clothing allowance for life, and a free monthly stipend.
These policies incentivize terrorism.
The Palestinian Authority has spent a whopping $355 million on the direct funding of terrorism this year. The U.S. is the Palestinian Authority's largest international donor, giving it over $700 million in indirect aid last year.
The Palestinian Authority is so dependent on foreign aid. The United States gives them foreign aid. The European Union gives them foreign aid. Most of the Western European countries give them. They have the power to stop this.
The legislation, which now goes on to the Senate, would cut off this funding beginning next year if the Palestinians do not halt Pay for Slay.
The Pentagon has said there is no timeline specifying if and when U.S. troops will pull out of Syria. Pentagon spokesman Eric Pehon noted that the U.S. troops' commitment in Syria will be, quote, conditions-based. He claimed that the U.S. military plans to stay in Syria to make sure Daesh terrorists do not return to the war-torn country. His comments come as Damascus has continually announced the presence of U.S. troops in Syria is illegal, as Washington is neither invited nor permitted to fight in the country. The U.S. currently has about 2,000 troops on the ground in Syria.
South Korea's National Assembly has approved a budget for its newly formed decapitation unit to eliminate North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and other top officials. The National Assembly approved the budget plan on December 6th with a 7% increase in overall military spending over the previous year. The Defense Ministry said the budget increase reflects the grim reality of North Korea stepping up its nuclear and missile programs. About $310,000 has been set aside to equip the decapitation unit. This would not be enough to cover a special plane or helicopter capable of infiltrating North Korea undetected. United Press International reports most of the money will be spent on special technology, such as soundproof headphones and biometric equipment. However, Yonhap News Agency quotes an official with the Defense Acquisition Program Administration saying the funds will be used on submachine guns and drones.
The U.S. has deployed B-1B bombers to the Korean Peninsula to take part in the joint Seoul-Washington air combat drills. South Korean military officials said on Wednesday that the bomber stationed in Guam arrived to conduct a bombing drill with South Korea's fighter jets. The U.S. usually deploys B-1B in pairs after North Korea's provocations in a show of force or on routine training missions. The last deployment of B-1B bombers came in early November ahead of U.S. President Donald Trump's regional trip. Seoul and Washington have been conducting a massive air combat drill known as Vigilant Ace. Over 200 warplanes are taking part, including 24 stealth fighter jets. 6 F-22s and 6 F-35s have been deployed to the Korean Peninsula, marking the first time the highly advanced jets have cruised the skies over South Korea at the same time. Other U.S. assets include 2 B-1B bombers and 6 Growler electronic warfare jets, as well as dozens of F-15s and F-16s. South Korea has deployed 90 fighter jets, including its F-15 and F-A-50 fighters. The exercises are scheduled to run through Friday.
Nuclear annihilation with little warning. That was the terrible fate that the generation that grew up in the 1950s and 60s was taught to fear and prepare for.
First, you duck, and then you cover.
School children were drilled on how to avoid being incinerated.
We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous. Since it may be used against us, we must get ready for it.
Public service films urged children to keep an eye out for Soviet planes and to head for shelter when the air raid siren boomed. Hollywood's response to this visceral fear was to produce a parade of nuclear-spawned monsters. Giant ants emerged from the site of nuclear bomb tests to attack society, as did giant radioactive spiders. And humans, bathed in terrifying radiation, grew like enormous looming symbols of destruction. The terror peaked in 1962 when the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the U.S. and Soviet Union to the brink.
This is a difficult and dangerous effort on which we have set out.
It receded as the superpowers negotiated a reduction of tensions and nuclear arsenals. But under the hawkish Ronald Reagan, fear of mutually assured destruction came roaring back.
It flares again, the nuclear fear, in the early 80s, when Ronald Reagan starts building Star Wars, MX missiles. Before the reform started in the Soviet Union, we were again at the brink.
This time, popular culture delivered not giant insects, but a realistic and powerful depiction of nuclear war in the widely watched television film called The Day After. When the Soviet Union collapsed, most Americans readily cast their nuclear nightmares away. Now, a new threat has emerged, but so far at least, the fear has not.
It's kind of surprising now, isn't it, that we seem to be in very perilous times with North Korea, but it doesn't resonate the way nuclear crises did in the past.
It's too early, perhaps, for popular culture to absorb the North Korean threat and decide how to respond.
We learned in the past few minutes that Vladimir Putin has officially announced his bid for the 2018 presidential election here in Russia.
There can be no better place and no better reason for making this announcement. I thank you for your support, and I will put forth my candidacy for the post of President of the Russian Federation.
If Russian President Vladimir Putin wins the upcoming election, it could be his last term as president, at least for a while. Putin announced Wednesday he plans to run for re-election. So far, he's served 3 terms as president and 1 term as prime minister. Russian presidents can only serve 2 consecutive terms in the office, but there's no rule saying they can't run again after sitting out for 1 round. That's what Putin did before. He served 2 4-year terms as president from 2000 to 2008, 1 as prime minister, and then got elected as president again in 2012. Russia extended the presidential term in 2008 from 4 years to 6 years under then-president and Putin right-hand man Dmitry Medvedev. If he wins the 2018 election, Putin should be in power until 2024. RT reports a, quote, unprecedented number of women will also run in the upcoming election. But according to polls, no one has a real shot of defeating Putin.
In other news, people who mutilate the genitals of young girls in the name of religion or culture may soon face stiff new penalties, and the House actually may face those stiff new penalties. The House of Representatives this week voted unanimously for the Stopping Abusive Female Exploitation Act. The legislation triples the federal penalty for female genital mutilation from 5 to 15 years in prison and calls on states to implement reporting requirements. Earlier this year, 3 people, including 2 doctors, were arrested in Michigan for mutilating the genitals of 7-year-old girls as part of their brand of Islam.
A bill to change how concealed carry gun laws work nationwide has passed the House, but faces an uphill battle in the Senate. The Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act passed the House 231 to 198. All but 6 Democrats voted against the bill, along with 14 Republicans. The bill actually contains 2 different gun law measures, one that makes all concealed carry permits valid in any state that allows concealed weapons, and one that is meant to strengthen the federal background check system. House leaders combined the 2 motions in an effort to win bipartisan support for the bill. It's possible the background check measure could win enough bipartisan support to pass the chamber on its own, but Senate Democrats are likely to successfully filibuster the concealed carry reciprocity measure.
Bitcoin surged above $12,000 Wednesday, breaking its own record a week after setting it. Bitcoin hit the new record high as CBOE Global Markets and CME Group Incorporated announced plans to trade Bitcoin futures starting in mid-December. Nasdaq also reportedly plans to introduce Bitcoin futures in 2018. The cryptocurrency started the year under $1,000, and it's still pretty volatile. On Wednesday last week, Bitcoin hit a then all-time high of over $11,000 before dropping to around $9,000 on Thursday. Bitcoin has been criticized by some experts who call it a dangerous bubble. Still, it's clearly picking up some traction.
Cryptocurrency marketplace NiceHash reported the contents of its Bitcoin wallet had been stolen in a security breach. One executive said almost $64 million had been lost in the hack. The company's head of marketing said the hack was, quote, a highly professional attack with sophisticated social engineering, end quote. He added that roughly 4,700 Bitcoin, worth about $63.92 million at current prices, were lost. In an earlier statement posted on its website, NiceHash said it had halted operations for 24 hours as it investigated the breach.
The U.S. homeless population has been declining for the better part of a decade, until this year. Data from the Department of Housing and Urban Development shows 2017 was the first year since 2010 that the overall figure rose. The department found during one night in January 2017, more than 550,000 people across the country were homeless. Cities on the East Coast and especially the West Coast seem to contribute the most to homeless rates. For instance, the more than 55,000 homeless residents in Los Angeles City and County amounted to a 25% increase over last year.
Poverty in Britain has continued to grow for the 5th year in a row. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation warns that work on tackling destitution is, quote, in peril and could fall apart. The report found that 14 million people, that's over a fifth of the population, now live in poverty. It's thought that nearly 400,000 more children are currently in poverty than they were 5 years ago, and that 300,000 more pensioners are in poverty now than they were in 2012.
Clashes between protesters and police took place in Athens overnight, just after a demonstration in memory of Alexandros Grigoropoulos, who was shot dead by a police officer on the 6th of December 2008. He was just 15 years old. His death sparked the worst riot in Greece had seen in decades. At least 23 people were detained overnight, although there were no immediate reports of injuries. Just after the demonstration in memory of the murdered teenager, clashes broke out in the city centre. Police officers removed all journalists from the spot as rocks were falling next to us. The clashes coincided with a police security operation to prepare for a 2-day visit to Greece by Turkish President Erdogan. Protesters honoured the memory of Alexandros Grigoropoulos, condemned police violence and demanded equal rights for all citizens.
A new report says almost 1 million people have fled conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The new figures come from a report released December 6th by the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, part of the Norwegian Refugee Council. Various militia groups have been fighting each other and the central government for territory, uprooting residents from their homes. Delayed elections that were supposed to take place last year have also caused unrest. President Joseph Kabila, who is already struggling to exert control over the country, has already served 2 terms and is barred from a 3rd. The center reported 997,000 people were internally displaced in the first half of 2017, more than in all of 2016. Meanwhile, 7.7 million people were food insecure as of August. The Norwegian Refugee Council's Congo country director called the situation a mega conflict that outpaces Syria and Yemen.
California under siege again. Massive wind-fueled flames sparking apocalyptic destruction, forcing more than 150,000 people to leave everything behind. Jonathan Hunt is live for us in Ventura. That's where the evacuation zone widened overnight. You know, Jonathan, we heard Nancy Pelosi use the word apocalyptic to describe the tax plan. This is apocalyptic.
That's exactly what it is, Heather, and no end in sight to the suffering of so many displaced residents here, no end in sight to the battles that the firefighters are having to go through. And this is what a lot of residents are going to be returning to in the city of Ventura. You can see here we're in the driveway of one house, pickup truck, family sedan, completely destroyed. And then you come up here, the garage door is right in front of us. And then behind that, the image of complete and utter destruction. And the thing we see so often in these fires, the only part of the house left standing, the chimney stack. Now, these fires have so far scorched some 55,000 acres across this area. This is the Thomas Fire, Ventura, about 60 miles north of Los Angeles. The fire's burning so fiercely, blown by fierce Santa Ana winds, which are those hot, warm winds. They're usually not as destructive in December because we've usually had some rain by now. Not the case this season, and that's why they're causing so much destruction. NASA has released some extraordinary images of the smoke from the fires blowing across Southern California now. And as I say, it's not just here in Ventura. In Sunland and Silmar, which is north of Los Angeles, the fire there has scorched some 11,000 acres, 30 structures, including homes, destroyed there. Also, it's been a big problem for a lot of livestock that are there. We have seen some heartbreaking images of horses fleeing through the smoke-filled streets of that area. Some of those horses have been killed. The good news, no fatalities so far among residents in any of these fires.
A pit bull refused to leave her dead friend for 2 weeks, but needed to be taken off the streets. Come here. Come here. Rescue organization Hope for Paws was alerted to the dogs near the railroad tracks. There wasn't anything they could do for the poodle, but the young, scared pit bull needed a home. First, they would have to get her to go with them, which would be no easy task.
Hi, honey, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Hey, 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 hey. Hey, it's okay. Babe. Herman, please. It's okay.
Frightened by a life on the streets, the pup didn't know what was to come next. But with more treats and some gentle petting, she eventually calmed down enough for the women to get her into their car.
Hi, honey. You ready to go to the doctor and get a bath?
The dog, named Cassandra, was taken care of by a no-kill shelter called Doggy Bones.
Hey, yay! Oh, boy!
After they got her cleaned up and gave her a lot of love, she was ready to be adopted. They report Cassandra now lives in a loving home, where she gets to be her playful, silly, happy self.